Hi, everybody, and welcome to Getting to the Point. Our episode today is Getting to the Point with Jenny Morse, and I am your host, Cindy Skalicki with On Point Communications. Jenny is a professor in the business school at CSU, and she also has her own business called Appendance. And Jenny and I met, I don't know, a couple months ago, maybe, Jenny, through Fort Collins Startup Week. That was one of the main times we got to chat. And we both have a passion for persuasion and rhetoric, which is always an instant friendship for me. But what's really cool is that Jenny is totally focused on writing, whereas you know that I am largely focused on speaking and the speaking skills that I help my clients with. Well, Jenny takes this to a whole new level with writing. So Jenny, welcome. Thanks for coming on the show today. And would you like to elaborate a little on your background and what you do at Appendance?
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Cindy.
Yeah, you bet.
So I teach people how to write anything for business. I mostly focus on email writing since that's how many of us are communicating frequently. But Appendance really does primarily face-to-face training at the corporate level of professionals in terms of how they can improve their overall business writing. We're also launching an online program that can be accessed anywhere. It's 6 weeks of independent work with some coaching involved, and it starts May 26th. So that's a new product that we're offering to help support people who want to improve their writing. And the reason that any of us would want to improve our writing is because of credibility, right? So in order to do business, we have to be able to trust each other. Trust is built through communication, both, in the spoken language. So when you meet people, you're looking for certain cues. And when you're writing to people, they are looking for certain cues from you. So I focus a lot on how to help people demonstrate that they are credible in their writing so that other people will trust them and want to work with them.
That's so important. Yes, the credibility ethos piece is really important. And I think what makes us a little different is that with you and with, when we write, it's permanent to a certain degree. Whereas, speaking can be either misunderstood or misinterpreted, which is, also problematic when it comes to speaking and wanting to do that clearly and concisely and with other pieces in place there. But the writing component, which we all do so much of every day with emails, is a constant part of our lives and our work lives. And I remember when I first met you, I was shocked that you could do an 8-hour training just on, I think it was grammar or some, just the basics of writing. And I just am fascinated by that. So I want to dive into the meat this right now with what we're going to chat through. And I thought it would be fun to give the audience here a rundown of what they should be doing before they sit down to type an email to someone in their network or for whatever purpose. While they're writing it, kind of what should they be thinking about in terms of language or length or whatever. And then what about before they hit the send button, in terms of what will that bring about in terms of follow-up, for example, of, that leaving that mark. So would you start out, Jenny, just take us through some of the planning pieces that you teach when it comes to people needing to come to the keyboard and start thinking about that first email draft?
Yeah. So I think just like you set up, we think about in teaching writing about planning your message before you write, drafting it, trying to do that as fast as possible, and then coming back and revising it afterwards. So in terms of the plan, this is work that you're doing before you actually write anything. And the key components of that are really figuring out what exactly you're trying to accomplish, so what your purpose is. And that purpose piece is twofold. Why am I writing to you? But then also trying to make it clear at the end of the message, what do I want you to do with this message? So that we have to make sure that our reader understands why they're reading the message in the first place, but also like what actions are they supposed to take as a result of the message. And ideally, you're setting those two pieces up as the frame for a message, the beginning and the end. The other
so can you give an example of how I remember you saying some things about what you shouldn't do, like don't start an email with, the purpose of me writing is blah, blah, blah. So what are some things that you find works well when you're writing an email as far as that beginning piece and the end piece, I think hopefully people grab as far as having an action step, which I find super important to do as well. But help us with that first piece if you have an idea.
I think the first piece has more variety actually than the end, because it's whatever you're writing about. So like I often send messages where I want to start by saying or my first draft will say something like, I have completed the document that you asked for, and I've put in our revisions, and I've attached it.
Okay.
That's a lot of that's a lot of just like focus on what I have done already. None of that is relevant to the reader. So when I go back, I put in things like, here's the attachment, which has been revised based on our discussion. So now it's not about what I did, it's about the thing that I'm offering to you. Why am I sending the message to you? And I think that's the signal that we want to send from the beginning of the message, is really about, why is the audience getting this message? So not why have I written it, but why are you receiving it? And trying to think about that opening as framing it for the reader.
So not what did I do and look at me, but look, here's what I'm providing you with. Now you have something that's of value in this email. So it's kind of like, bringing value into the email, would you say?
Yeah, well, making sure that the reader understands what the value is from the very beginning. Yeah.
Okay,
and
perfect.
It's really important too that that's there, because a lot of us aren't reading the entire email. And so you want to try to put that at the top.
That's a great segue into how long should emails be. And so let's kind of move to that middle ground piece of how to think through length. And then I would love for you to share with the audience the upward, downward, lateral relationship piece too.
Sure. Well, that's part of the planning process. So should we talk about that first?
Yeah, let's go to back to part one.
So the audience piece, when you are speaking to people face to face, your brain automatically adjusts the language that you use based on the people that you're speaking to. So basically through our experience, we've learned that there are certain groups of people, like your boss, who you speak to in not a formal way, but you use particular language, complete sentences. Usually your tone is a little bit lower. But when we're talking to our best friend, we might swear. and you tend not to like cross those lines, not without exception, right? Sometimes you swear with your boss.
Sure.
But we have those sort of language barriers that are unconscious. They're based on our experience. Okay, so when you're talking to that person, your brain adapts your language for you. When we are writing, we are all just looking at a screen. And so our brain doesn't make that adaptation for us that it makes when we're face to face. We have to actually visualize that audience. So in order to visualize that audience, I mean, you're just going to imagine them in your head, but we also want to think really carefully about what's their relationship to us. So that's upward is, do they have power over us? So do they have power over our ability to do our job or to get what we want? That's an upward relationship where we have to demonstrate our credibility to them. Neutral relationships are people you're working with in order to get things done, but you don't really have power over each other. So it's often like people from two different businesses who are working on or coordinating the same project. And so they don't decide whether each of those people has a job, but they both need to work together to get something done. And then downward are people who work for you. So anyone who reports to you, the most important thing there, you don't have to demonstrate your credibility to them, but you have to be nice to them. If you're not nice to them, they won't want to work for you anymore. So downward relationships, the most important thing is just respect. Are your messages showing respect for the people who you pay to work for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a really important question. Yeah.
I feel like I spend a lot of time in that third bucket, making sure that my message is nice. And if I read it again and I think, is there any way possible this could be misconstrued as being whatever, snarky, bossy, demanding? That's probably a good one as far as how things often go off the rails, because I know when I'm reading an email that could be construed one way or the other, it's so helpful to get that extra clause that I then read that's like, I really just want to underscore how much I appreciate what you're doing. I just want to clarify this with you.
Right.
You know, so there's this ability to diffuse any potential messiness that can linger, right? I mean, for days it can be, what did they mean by this? Why did she say those words? So I think that's a really key point about, yeah, needing to be nice, and still maintain, obviously, you know, the credibility and getting the job done that you need to do. But
Right. And I think that's a great thing into what should we be thinking about when we're drafting, because the three things we should be thinking about when we're drafting, you already mentioned, like how short should the message be? So conciseness,
right.
considerate. So is our message nice? Is it considerate? And that should be to everybody. It's just the upward, neutral, downward tells you what's your most prominent value.
Okay.
So yeah, we think about conciseness, consideration, and clarity. Is my message clear? And so as you're drafting, you're just sort of focusing on those kinds of things. I teach really specific techniques for how to do those things at the sentence level. So how do we craft sentences that are clear and short and positive? The positive piece has a lot to do with pronouns. So we use I and you when we speak, and then, you know, they switch places depending on who the speaker is. And in writing, those words convey who we're thinking about, who we're focused on, in a way that I don't think is the same when we speak face to face with each other. The pronouns don't have as much emphasis, but when we're writing, if, like I was saying before, if I write a message that has a lot of I did this, I want to, you're sending a signal to the reader that I'm thinking about myself and I'm not thinking about you. So we pay a lot more attention to those pronouns in order to be nice. There's a little bit of the social, like, how was your weekend?
Right.
Doing well at the beginning and the end of a message. That's nice too. But most of it is how you make requests. So things like, how do you ask a particular question, or how do you frame something so that there's enough information that the person has what they need, but not so much that you're coloring their experience of that information with your opinion about it. So things like adverbs.
Okay.
Adverbs are ly words. And so I have some exercises where we go through taking out ly words because they affect how we interpret information. So my central example is a group was writing an assessment of a team, and their assessment started with the sentence, only 4 out of 5 team members were present. And they brought the report to me and they said, we feel like this is really mean. Like, it just feels bad. How can we fix it? Take out only.
Out the only, right?
Right? 4 out of 5 team members were present is objective. Only 4
fully
out of 5
factual, right?
says that we expected all of them to be there. So you're thinking about how language actually functions. And this is why I can spend 8 hours talking about grammar.
Yes, I can see why.
So how does language actually function in order to create meaning? And then we're playing with those tools in order to change that experience of meaning.
Okay. Awesome. Boy, I could sit through your 8-hour training because it sounds like it would be really interesting. I love words. I feel like, at least, I'm pretty in tune with what I'm very choosy about them for specific reasons. It does not mean that I, hit it out of the park every single time, because believe me, we've all had our fair share of oops, wish I could take that back. But the sensitivity and the awareness about the words and how much power they really do have, and that obviously translates into speaking as well, is a really important muscle for people to learn how to flex and strengthen in their communication toolbox, if you will. So,
well, and I think the thing that you're talking about that we have in common, most of us don't get formal training, like middle school, high school, higher education, formal training in communicating to others. Most of our experience of learning how to write or how to speak, we are so anxious about what we are going to say. And so we focus on, or we learn how to express our ideas. And that's important, that's foundational. But then, like, education sort of goes, and you'll figure out how to communicate with others on your own. And you and I are in the business of saying, like, no, actually, we can teach you how information will be received, and then how to change how you're crafting it so that it's received better.
Right. I feel like the missing piece there is, we can teach you how to communicate, but you cannot eliminate the receptivity of the audience piece of that. Like, you can't just learn that without consideration of how it's received. I mean, you know, we all have seen the very most basic visual of what communication is, right? Person A talking to person B, and then there's the message arrow in between, and the circular nature of that. So
Yep.
I always tell my clients too, the weakest link in Aristotle's triangle of speaker, audience, message is always audience, because it's something people typically shortchange. And if they can hone in on that piece, it's going to really dramatically improve how they communicate. So, and the effectiveness of the communication.
Yes.
So perfect. Well, let's move to the closing, and, you know, and how to kind of wrap it up, what to do before you hit send with those emails.
Yeah, so the drafting piece, you're thinking about clarity, conciseness, consideration, but you're trying to draft as quickly as possible. So a recommendation is to set a timer. Like if
5
you're
minutes, or how long?
Like 5 minutes, but if you can make it shorter, I mean, challenge yourself. It should be hard, but it means that you're just getting it out. We tend to be much better editors of words, so we can review it and play with it once it exists, than we are at creating the language. I mean, obviously there's a whole group of people who creative write and are wonderful.
Sure.
That's actually my training, is in creative writing. But for a lot of us, sort of the professional experience is, I'm not a great writer, I have to write, and so I get caught up in each word at the very beginning. So a recommendation is just to draft as quickly as possible, because you are going to spend time revising it. And so just neurologically, none of us are capable of reviewing our own writing effectively. Once we've created it, it exists in our brain already. And so when we read it back to ourselves, we see what we think we wrote. And this also has a lot to do with our visual processing, where the way that information comes in through our eyes and gets transformed in our brains, we don't focus on correctness very much. So our brains don't take in that, they're looking for meaning. So we find errors in correctness when we can't understand the meaning. That's what triggers errors. Anyway, so you already have this in your head, the message that you wrote. You have to step away from that message for a minimum of 15 minutes in order to be able to see what is on the screen, separate from what you think you typed. And that 15 minutes can feel like it feels long.
Yes.
And people think, well, how will I get anything done if I draft a message and then I have to wait 15 minutes before I can proofread it? So really, you need to draft several messages really quickly and then go do something else that you would have done afterward, like make a phone call or go to a meeting or do something to fill that time, right? Be productive or not, but you're trying to do a series. So you're drafting a series and then you're doing something else, and then you're coming back and you're revising that series.
Okay.
And that helps you focus your attention on the revision stuff. So when you're revising, you're checking for, again, the clarity, the conciseness, the consideration. We often see like, oh, there are words in here I didn't need, right? I can tighten this up.
Yeah.
Or I forgot to include the date, even though it says Tuesday, but how do they know if I'm talking about next Tuesday or the one after, right? So we'll add information, we'll tighten things up, we'll maybe turn something that was a statement, like, I was wondering if you could blah, blah, blah. That ends with a period. You're not asking anything. So we might think to turn that into a question where we actually ask, could you, question mark.
Right.
And then we can also see our errors.
Yep. Okay. Perfect. Well, you bring up an interesting point, which is one of the things I try to do with email writing has to do with brevity. And the reason is, when you're typing on your laptop, because that's the fastest way to type, I think a lot of times we forget that although we're writing it on a laptop that has a 7 or 8 inch screen, and so our sentences are nice and long on the laptop, when you put that sentence that's 3 lines long onto a screen that's this big, now it's 7 lines long. And so those pieces really play into brevity in terms of emails. I read an article a few months ago about how you should try to aim for like 5-minute email. And I am the queen of taking too long to draft my email. It might as well be like a report sometimes, you know? And it's like, if your email takes longer than 5 minutes to write or draft, in maybe your case, maybe you should pick up the phone, or maybe you should generate an attachment for someone to review a specific order of things like an agenda or whatever it might be. But you know, I think that you make great points about needing to go back to revise. And I suspect you're going to get better and faster at the revising the more that you do it. Is that your experience?
I think so. I think it's more that probably all of us are adequate at it right now, but it's the separation of those processes. So most of us draft and then look at what we wrote and try to fix what we wrote. And that's not a very effective way to do it, just because of how our brains work. So I think the separation of those processes makes us significantly more effective. I do something all the time, like I save drafts all the time. I'll write them at night and then I look at them in the morning before I send them out. But I've also started doing the schedule send.
I love that feature. Yes, I love it.
The schedule send, then like I'm done with it, but then sometimes your brain keeps working on it.
Yes.
And then I'll do something else and be like, oh man, I totally forgot to. And then I go back and
go edit it. Yeah.
Send, right?
Yes.
Still exists. Yes. So I think just using the tools to separate out the processes is what helps us. So one of the classes that I teach, I have 2 different classes that are 8 hours on grammar. Okay. But then I also have a course that's 8 hours on email. I have one that's 8 hours on habits. They're actually 6.5 hours with breaks and lunch, but but the habit one is where the things we're talking about. So we spend time in the morning on planning, time in the middle on drafting, and then we go over some of the proofreading stuff in the afternoon. And it's one of the most helpful classes because it applies to every single thing that we do. What we're trying to do is figure out what are the processes for writing that will support the most effective and efficient writing.
Okay. Awesome. Wow, so much awesome information here, Jenny. Thanks for kind of walking us through some of these basic steps. Yeah. I'd love to close, if you don't mind, with a few rapid fire questions for you, just for fun. Ready. Okay, you ready? All right, the first question is, what book is currently sitting on your nightstand, or are you reading maybe electronically right now as we are here today? What book, and what are you learning from it?
I tend to read a fiction book and a nonfiction book at the same time. Okay. So I'm reading a book. I don't think I recommend it. It's very depressing. The nonfiction book is something about black swans, swan, which is about catastrophic events that change the way the world functions. I thought, I could learn something.
It right now. So.
Right. I thought I could learn something from this book, but I just feel really sad while I'm reading it. Now, I'm not very far into it. So he's basically right now saying like all of our ways of thinking about the world are retrospective. So like we make sense of things based on the past.
Yep.
But black swan things like coronavirus, right, are things that aren't based on the past. They come out of nowhere, and that's why they shift the world. And so it feels like where I am in the very beginnings of the book, like there's no way to predict anything because the future is not based on the past.
Well, it sounds probably like you're nodding your head a lot while you're reading that.
I'm just going, okay, well, what is the
now what?
Here? I'm only on page like 88 or something.
Okay.
Several.
Well, maybe that will come forward. How about your fiction book?
My fiction book is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle.
Okay.
And, I can't remember if that's the last name. Anyway, it's sort of like a Clue, that movie Clue.
Yes. Oh, okay, great.
So it's really it's a murder mystery in an old mansion.
Oh, nice.
Except that the protagonist keeps switching bodies.
Oh, very confusing.
Yes.
But very interesting. Yes.
So he's trying to solve the mystery, but every chapter he's in a different guest.
So the mystery is on you too, to figure out which person he's in, right?
No, they tell you which person he's in, but there's this like he's in there, and so each body that he inhabits, like he fights with the host a little bit, and he's getting
Mm.
pieces of information. It is super complicated, and they provide a
Okay.
cast of characters, and I'm still finding
Okay.
it hard
Okay.
to
Well,
track. I
I'll
will not solve the mystery before the book is over.
yeah, probably not. Exactly. Okay, question 2. Who is a mentor or a former teacher who really influenced your life?
Um, so Martha Falk is she goes by Marty, is the woman who I met at a barbecue 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And I had just moved into the College of Business from the English department and was teaching business writing communication. And she is the spouse of one of the professors in the department. And I met her at the barbecue, and she said, I have been doing some training, corporate training in business writing for the last 25 years, and I think I'm ready to retire. I think you'd be really good as my replacement. And now I have a business.
Yes. Oh, I remember that story, you telling me that, and I thought how fortuitous. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's not surprising for you
So
to.
she's been amazing. She and her husband, Ray Hogler, moved to San Diego, and my sister lives in San Diego. So when I have been out there, I try to visit them and see how their retirement is treating them. They're doing pretty well.
Nice.
But yeah, that changed my entire life.
Yes, I can see that. Wow,
Yeah,
that's super cool. Very, talk about being in the right place at the right time, right?
no kidding.
Wow.
Could not have them. I remember getting ready for that barbecue too, and I run those two parallel memories. I was so nervous because I didn't know any of
Oh,
the people.
yeah, right.
And I thought,
Oh, so cool.
I have to go, I have to go, I have to go. And I made it all the way there, and it was very awkward. And then I met Marty, and now I have a house and a business and
Yeah, wow.
everything I could ask for.
I don't know, right? That just encourages all of us to sometimes those one-off networking things, or maybe a coffee that you don't feel much like going to. I have learned the same, maybe not as dramatic of a response as yours, of course, but there have been so many people that I've gone to meet for that one little coffee that I felt tired about, or stressed about, or didn't have time for, it seemed, that then eventually led to something really amazing. So yep, get out there, go meet those folks, and
Yeah.
find out what the value is. Okay, Jenny, how can people find you? We're at the end of our time now, so how can people reach you? And
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Best place to find me is the website for my company. So it's appendance.com. Appendance is like a pen dance. So as a creative writer, I think it's a very cool word. It means to add to in writing, but it's a pen dance, 2 P's though, appendance. And then appendance is how you say it. On there had all the information about me, about some of our other instructors who do training, about our face-to-face training is what we talked about today, but the online course, which is launching May 26th, is described there. And I'm hosting a workshop April 28th, so next Tuesday, going over all of these email strategies. And then it's a workshop, so the goal is for people to leave with revised templates or revised emails that they can actually start sending right away.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Jenny. It was great to see you here. I know we'll have a lot more chances to connect in the future and hopefully bring something out to the audience between the two of us. We've talked about webinars jointly, and there's no question that that would be really high value for people who need to up their writing and speaking game at the same time. So
we
thank
all have
you.
to communicate, right?
That's right. That's right. Thanks, Jenny. It was great to see you. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll be in touch. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.